So I asked the chair that I would present myself, because I think it's quite important to position myself as far away from physics as possible. So the title of my talk is different than the one you can find in your proceedings. I was actually thinking that perhaps Thomas censored me, because it's like "shut up" mentioned in the title. So it's Transplanting, Shut Up and Calculate on First-Person Research. So actually the talk should be meant for cognitive scientists that know nothing about quantum physics, and then you can manipulate them with some fancy terminology and Bell's terms and so on. So as you see, I'm coming from cognitive science department at University of Ljulbjana. My background, there is a little bit of the physics in my background. I did graduate in theoretical physics, but already parallelly studying philosophy and then cognitive science. So I really ask the forgiveness of all the physicists here. And we did talk yesterday at the dinner, and there is a lot of metaphorical notions of quantum physics and a lot of very stretched interpretations, so I do feel sort of comfortable. So let me first explain what do I mean by shut up and calculate. There will be no calculation actually, but there will be a little bit of the shut up involved somewhere along the way. So I wanted to find a good articulation of Copenhagen interpretation, and I think that is the best one. It was done by David Mermin. Allegedly, there are a couple of different names attached to this nice phrase, but let's say that it was him. He has so many brilliant quotes that I would guess that it might be him. So forget about all this formalism that explains the relationship between the measurements and so on, but I think that shut up and calculates sort of emphasizes exactly what I want to get out of this Copenhagen-Bohr's idea of quantum physics. And that is that. So I would like to see that agnosticism towards the reality of what we are doing as a feature and not as a bug. So this is the point of my talk, and I would like to show how that might be quite useful, not only to take it as such within the quantum physics, but more importantly in some other developing areas of science, namely cognitive science, and more specifically first-person research. I will, for those that are not familiar with those terms, I will hopefully, if time permits, introduce them along the way. So before I start, I would like to just position my little contribution into a broad area of ideas trying to connect cognition and quantum mechanics. You know, we saw some of them. We will still see some of them today, I guess. So there is this sort of pairing of quantum and cognitive seems to be really tempting, really tempting. Since I think it started in 1920s, as soon as quantum mechanics started to being formulated, and it doesn't seem to be going down. So there is a number of different permutations of this pairing, you know. One very sort of a natural one is that quantum mechanics being the foundation of physics, physics being the foundation of everything else. So the quantum foundation is also the foundation of consciousness, and let's find how it does. We have different, of course, very different ideas how that could be sort of connected. Perhaps the most notorious are like Hamarov, Penrose, microtubuli ideas, and so on. So I'm not going into that. Another one is the opposite. You know, it's more mystical, more new agey. So consciousness seems to be needed in some interpretations of quantum mechanics. So obviously, consciousness is primary. Why not say that quantum mechanics is sort of needs consciousness, if not, it comes out of consciousness, and sort of quantum mechanics coming out of consciousness is probably going to be talked about next. And I'm not putting this here, but we will see much more about it in the next lecture. So there are more New Age interpretations, and there are more say, serious physical stuff where quantum mechanics is connected to free will and so on. Again, not my area. And then we have a sort of a version of psychophysics. You know, probably psychophysics, we have some people from Vienna, was sort of invented by Mach and others in the end of 19th century, wanted to use the physical formalisms to calculate or to understand social and cognitive systems. So I would call this is my naming, quantum formalism. I think we saw some of that yesterday at the plenary, so where somebody said we are agnostic about what these formalisms mean, but we are using them for, let's say, cognitive or social systems. So I might be a little bit close, what I'm going to say is close to that. But I would not put sort of a quantum physics in some superior or inferior position to cognitive science. I would just like to say that they share some similar characteristics. The systems researched are sharing some similar characteristics. And being agnostic about the underlying reality seems to be quite a good way to approach it. So this is actually it. So that's it. You're done. As I said, forget about calculate, about this. Forget about this fancy phrase. I would just like to use it as a sort of metaphor for being agnostic towards the reality of what is being researched, measured, and so on. So I see this lecture made of 3 parts. The first part is behind us. The second part will be a short detour into the theory of science. I would sort of believe that what I'm going to say in the next couple of slides is sort of truisms and quite natural for anybody studying a little bit of what science actually is supposed to do, not just my narrow methodological field. But still, I will go through it. Please yawn very obviously if that will be too much, too boring. And then I would like to transplant all that into first-person research. That is the part of like newly emerging part of cognitive science dealing with research of experience, of lived human experience, or re-emerged. So let's start with sort of a little bit of the theory of science. So the question is, what is a scientific theory? And again, a lot of the quotations I'm going to present are from Bell's really beautiful paper Against the Measurement. Beautiful, but also telling. This is one of the examples. So as you can see, and Bell was not satisfied with this, this was in his words born interpretation. So this is not about electron being there, it's just the electron being found there. This is what our formalism tells us about. So no claim about reality, and of course Bell didn't like that. So the scientific theory in general is supposed to be just a sort of a proposition regarding some sort of the relationship between categories. This is, I think, the broadest definition I could find. So it doesn't tell what the categories are. It could be even applied to qualitative research. It could be categories like qualitative categories, what we do actually in phenomenological research, or it can be much more quantitative, measured, and again, what is the relationship? It could be just a narrative, but of course we don't want narrative, we want something much more strict, much more mathematical, a formalism, as physicists would say. What is category? Category is something defined by how we get it. That is, again, clear truism. So we have to ask, and then whatever is presented to us, the way of asking defines what the category is. I really like this change that quantum physics did to observables. So not variables anymore, they're observables. So it's quite clear that the question is what we observe. In quantum physics, we have a lot of talk about preparing. The first lecture we had was a lot of preparing the system, you know. So this is what we are talking about here. So the important bit of what is the scientific theory is that there is no talk about reality, underlying reality. It's just some proposition about something that you see, everything can be seen from the point of observer. I will probably there will be no time, I will say something about cubism that is closest to this notion, but when I say observer, it's just whatever you can, let's say, whatever you can yourself check out. You don't need any interpretation for that. You can read the meter or some apparatus and so on. So I wouldn't talk too much about experience, because as you will see, experience is a bit more complicated term. But at least what is available to the observer, this is then sort of put into some sort of context, into some sort of a narrative or formalism, connecting all available measurements, and the theory should be this narrative, as formal as possible. So I think Popper did a lot of work concerning that. He would say the theory should not, the theory should be falsifiable, and he was also talking about theories as about evolution of science. He compared the development of scientific theories to the evolution, to the natural selection. So you explain, you fit more data, available data into the theory, better it is, better chances for survival. So you see, again, no talk about what the reality is behind it, and I think we will hear from the next lecture that theory working well does not necessarily mean that it does sort of fit to whatever is out there. I would perhaps the best illustration of this point is the little anecdote that you probably are familiar with, attributed to Wittgenstein, where he was talking to a friend saying, "Tell me, why do people always say it was natural for a man to assume that the sun went round the earth rather than the earth was rotating?" His friend replied, "Well, obviously because it just looks as though the sun is going round the earth." Wittgenstein replied, "Well, what would it have looked like if it had looked as though the earth was rotating?" So you see that the idea of what we are talking about, the formalism, does not tell us about what is behind it. It just tells us how to connect the observables. Okay, I'm boring, right? It's quite obvious, so let's go on. Still, there is some very, very deep need to find something real in what we are saying. And I think all this inflow of interpretations of quantum physics just sort of shows this deep attraction to somehow connect our formalism to something that we can call reality. And it's not just, and there's another nice quote by Mermin, nearly 90 years after its formulation, disagreement about the meaning of the theory is stronger than ever. New interpretations appear every year. None ever disappear. I think there is something deeper there than just this our natural instinct to be only satisfied when we are finding the truth about reality, not just when we describe our observations well. That's so low comparing to I found the truth, you know. Whenever you see the sort of apologies for science, we are telling the truth, you know, and then they become quite similar to apologies for religion or apologies to something else. So to illustrate, I think there is also something else. We need some notion of what is real in order to use our formalisms. Not only in order to be more satisfied with them, but in order to use them. And I would like to just for a moment go from that distinction that we constantly find in quantum texts between classical and quantum into another distinction, actually two distinctions that I will take as similar but they not necessarily are. And that is the distinction made by Wilfrid Sellars between manifest image and scientific image, and distinction by Husserl between life world and the world of science. So I'm not sure if you know those two authors. Sellars was a very, very famous philosopher. Actually, both are very famous, but from very different sides of the philosophy spectrum. They were Edmund Husserl, that was his last word, the crisis of European science, that was never actually finished. So that's why the 1970, the year of publication, because that was the full publication with Fink's additions and so on. So in their conclusions, they totally disagree. But they start with a very similar premise. So we could divide the experience, again in the broadest sense of the Western person, into two levels. First one would be, let's call it in Sellars' terms, manifest image, and another scientific image. In Husserl's terminology, we have life world, so this is I guess this is pretty obvious what he means, that the everyday notion of how things are, comparing to the world of science, which is something, it's supposed to be something much more delicate, something much more precise, and something much more true, at least according to Sellars. So Sellars defines science as something that unveils the hidden reality behind our manifest image. So, or beyond, or sort of underlying the manifest image. So he would say scientific image, unlike the manifest image, involves the postulation of imperceptible entities and principles pertaining to them to explain the behavior of perceptible things. So you see, so actually he saw this scientific image as something that can give much better explanation of whatever we are experiencing in here. Okay? A little bit back to quantum mechanics. For example, this is from Landau Lifshitz textbook of quantum mechanics, but again quoted by, he uses LL by L for that textbook. And again, they say the quantum mechanics requires for its formulation classical concepts. So we need classical concepts for formulation of the theory, but the theory actually is for something much better and much more cool, much more subtle than the classical concepts. So this is the part of the list of what are the ontological, and I'm quoting this, principles on which the classical part, and I would like to say that this is the classical part in a way corresponds to the live world or corresponds to the manifest image, according to Bohr, but taken from the paper by Fay. So I'm not sure if this is a quotation by Gore, but he summarized them. I'm not going to go through them, but you can see this is something that we could say is sort of a natural image, natural instinct of how the world is. And please be careful about the principle of continuity, which will become important later. So what I want to emphasize here is that whatever we measure, we always get the measurement in the life world. So our experience of whatever the apparatus is, of whatever the results are, never is has any tunneling qualities or spooky action at the distance. It's always continuous and so on. So our experience, we can do whatever physical experiments is always continuous, always has all these characteristics and some more. Forget about this. This is just a Bell's idea of how we could say that he tried to criticize that notion that the world as a whole consists of R plus S. So S would be the system that is measured, and R is the rest of the world. So you see, so this is a problematic concept that I will try to tackle, and I think that Seller's idea of what science does changes this equation. There is no world, and then the world consists of two parts, of the classical and quantum. No, there is the R, let's call it life world, which is the function, in Seller's terms, of S, of something underlying, in our case, quantum world. And now that we come to the difference between Sellers and Husserl. Husserl totally disagreed with that. He would turn this last sort of relationship on its head. He would say, no, the basic world is the experiential world, the life world. This is the basic, this is something that we can always rely upon. And then the scientific world is sort of a formalism to help us survive within this world. Okay? So this is quite important. And let's translate this to the epistemic and ontological difference that we can find within the interpretations of quantum mechanics. It would say, oh, it's just epistemic. A wave function is just epistemic. You know, this is really low. You know? But I think that the actual difference is the same. The difference between Seller's notion of what is fundamental and Husserl's notion of what is fundamental. You know, so Husserl goes into this Cartesian reduction and tries to see what actually we cannot doubt on. That there can be no doubt about our experience. So let's start here. And on the other side, we have Sellers who said, experience is vague, you know, the classical view of modern science. We have to find some more underlying ground, and this is the ontological one. The problem is that we have no idea how to sort of prove that something has ontological value, and I think we will hear more of that later on. So this first one is sort of connected to cubism. I'm not going to. I don't think I have any. How much time do I still have? Oh, good. That's not so much, but you seem very reassuring. So, so I'm not going to. We can discuss that later at the coffee. What are my problems with cubism? Like, for example, it doesn't understand the notion of experience and of belief, but later or never. I would also like to say that I do obviously prefer very sort of honest interpretation of what physicists are doing, which is let's call it epistemically grounded, epistemic interpretation. But by no means I would say it's a bad thing to find what is true, to try to find. Not expect too much out of it, but why not? Of course, because, as I said, I think some notion of underlying reality is needed to understand the formalism. So I'm absolutely not against it, but one should be clear that the first part is something that we are grounded, we are empirically grounded. This is what we measure, this is what we are dealing with. There is no notion whether this has some connection to external or whatever reality or underlying reality. So, but that should by no means stop people finding new interpretations or whatever. So now let's go to part 2, the cognitive science. So can we help ourselves with any of this? I would like to divide this into 2 parts. First, I would like to show the similarity between the two. I will go back to some things that we already said. And then try to show this agnostic position as a sort of a tool for researching consciousness or first-person experience. There are other very interesting connections, like uncertainty and so on, but I'm not going to touch them because it would be, well, completely another story. So let's go now to cognitive science. This is the very nice quotation by cybernetician, constructivist Heinz von Förster, describing the transition of cybernetic movement to cybernetic of the second order, which was the sort of the realization of cyberneticians that actually, you know, cybernetics was the movement in like 40s, 50s, involving also von Neumann, our people, and so on, that started cognitive science in a way. But a part of cyberneticians said, well, but there is something strange, you know, if we now can model these cognitive mechanisms, aren't we this mechanism that are modeling? So you see this, and von Förster was really a poet. So a brain is required to write a theory of a brain. From this follows that the theory of the brain that has any aspirations for completeness has to account for the writing of this theory. And even more fascinating, the writer of this theory has to account for her or himself. So this is that sort of circular problem that a part of cyberneticians encounter in like 60s. Another part was really happy with AI that was starting developing at that time and didn't care about that. And this was a successful part, you know, that really started the mainstream of cognitive science until 10 years ago. And I would like you to compare this to the realization that apparatus itself must obviously be considered as a quantum system. So the problem that Bell actually also mentioned, that the problem, are there really 2 words, or is the measurement device a quantum device, and you know all that much more than me. So and then there is another quotation taken from Varela, again about the same stuff. So I hope you see some sort of similarity, and I also hope that you notice, at least in the physical part, that there is sort of a schizophrenic nature, you know, and Bohr was the first to notice that in the physical part, sort of oscillation between 2 positions, a position of a detached person who is measuring, and position or person. I'm not putting the consciousness in physics here, just detached measuring device, and being all one single system. You see this constant oscillation, even if we agree with Sellers that these are not like 2 worlds that have to be summarized to account for the whole world, but just one underlying other. Again, in order to think about the world, you have to, in these parts of the world, namely quantum physics and consciousness, you have to oscillate between these 2 positions. So I guess this is quite similar to both systems. And why does it come from? Because the self-referential nature cannot be ignored. Again, von Förster was calling those systems non-trivial systems. So the involvement of observation cannot be sort of ignored or put into brackets when thinking about the science. Now we are going to the first-person research, which is, of course, the most brutal example of this self-referentiality. First-person research is the research of how it's like to be. So how do I experience? How a person experiences? Just a lived human experience. And what it's like to be this, taken from Nagel's famous paper, what's like to be a pet. So the question is here, is there can there even be a conceived border between the experience observing and the experience being observed? And Searle, 30 years ago, put it very bluntly that this exact fact that whenever I start observing, the experience is totally changed, makes that kind of research quite impossible. And some other, like Bitbol and others, are calling this excavation, and me are calling this excavation fallacy. So, despite these strong objections, the field of first-person research really developed recently, like last 2 years, last two decades, redeveloped, because of course the German introspectionists started like more than 100 years ago. So, and now it's just some of the most famous or most used techniques of gathering data, first-person data, some interview techniques, some like think aloud protocol, and so on. I would just like to, I'm not going to go into this, I would just like to, by the way, descriptive experience sampling by Halbert is the guy from, I talked yesterday about. So I would just like to say that mostly all of them are still trying to somehow bypass that excavation fallacy. Most of them are trying to see the pure experience as it is. Halbert calls it pristine experience, you know, not the experience that was muddied and damaged by observation, but something that was there. And obviously, you can quite clearly see where I'm going with my suggestion. And instead of explaining this, I would like you to do a little exercise, and I would like to check your experience of your left knee. It's inspired by you. Have some experience of your left knee? I hope so. Otherwise you're asleep or in coma. But did you have it before I asked you for it? Did you? Probably not, or most of perhaps Stefan had it, yeah, because he has a problem with the knee, but for the rest of you, probably you didn't have it, most of you probably didn't have it. So where did it come from? Was it there all the time? Was it there?
Yes, it was fine. It was
then your, I don't know, back of your head or something. You see, it seems when you check it, it's there. It was there. I just copied it from some resource, but was it really there? You know, what is the ontological nature of the actual pristine experience of your left knee before I asked you for it? That's the question. 5 minutes. This is a censorship. Okay, I will. I have so many examples, but we can skip them easily. So they are all in that direction. So I hope you see the problem of measurement being translated into the problem of researching experience. I would argue that no question, no answer. Probing, we call it probing, you know, have to probe to get the answer, is really sort of very, very similar. It can be described in a totally similar ways as the problem of the experience of measurement in quantum physics. I would suggest that we don't talk anymore about excavation fallacy, that we use excavation characteristics, and there is a long quotation taken from Bitbol and Petit-Majon answer in Constructivist Foundations. We have an editor-in-chief here, published, where they quote Bohr, how he also had a similar sort of attitude towards a measurement in quantum physics. So let's not see measurement as something that spoils, as for example Lawrence Krauss, he says measurement is a violent act. Yep, sometimes it is, but let's not see it as a spoiling factor, but as a, let's say, co-constructive factor. And the problem is that we don't know how much was constructed, how much was already there. We can never know that. If we could, then we could do some second-order measurement to determine that. And I think the term that describes this agnosticism, this not knowing whether we really took some information from the world or we just constructed or some combination of those, I think that the term enaction, coined by Varela, Thompson, and Roche in 91. Actually, I think it was coined before already, but made famous by them. It's quite a they had some other ideas how to use it, but they say we want to emphasize the middle way between, and they were talking about perception, between what they call the chicken position, which is observation, is recovery of pre-given properties of the world, and the egg position. Cognitive system constructs its own reality. So it's not total construction, it's not recovery, it's some sort of co-construction. Okay? So now I would go into 2 more examples, but I don't have time anymore. I will just, there's like 10 slides or even more. I would like to show you the example of vision, which is very interesting. You know the saccades, the eye tracking data. This is the eye tracking data. You put people in front of the face and say, look at the face, and that's how your saccades, your eyes are moving. So you see, are we painting the face, or is the face really there? This is the painting by a Russian painter from 19th century, Unexpected Guest. And there you have, this is taken from a very old Russian neuroscience textbook. Different patterns of eye movements in different conditions. So conditions mean expectations. So, for example, free examination, whatever that means, and then we have estimate material, that's the second one on the right, estimate material circumstances of the family. You see it goes different. You see, you ask different according to what you expect. And now this what I'm saying now, and it started with the second order cybernetic, is now very popular under the name Bayesian brain, and I think we will hear, I saw some slides according to that, so I'm not going into this, but again I will go to from first there's aesthetical imperative, saying if you want to see, learn how to act, or learn how to measure, perhaps. I will skip that. That's not so important. I wanted to put at this point a little bit of what we actually do in my research group, and I was stealing, I wanted to steal a little bit of the slides from Susan Blackmore, UK cognitive scientist. She is trying to explain that this is all illusion, that we constantly have the full picture of the world in our minds. That's not true. It's not true because our processing abilities are far from that good. You know, we can just see a little bit of the tunnel of the visual area clearly. So it would be, it would be like 5 times per second like this, if actually we would be seeing what actually is out there. So classical view is that we slowly construct, not slowly, but as quickly as possible, construct the whole image and then hold it in some sort of memory. This was disproven. And then there are 2 new theories, very new by Dennett. He's talking about some sort of statistics that could explain this. Simon Levin, 20 years ago, said, we just have a gist of what is there. And then whenever I'm asking, so what is the rose? We will check this as quickly as possible, so we will have the feeling that we constantly have the total command of the whole visual area. And this gist is exactly what we are studying. We are studying the phenomenological part of the gist, not in the visual sense, but just in forming beliefs. So there I feel quite close to yesterday's speaker who was telling about the emergence of beliefs. So this is exactly what we are studying. We don't call it emergence, we say inaction of beliefs. And gist is that feeling that I can answer. And then I probe it, and answer comes or not. You know, this is the gist, this is what we're studying, and of course I cannot help myself putting some quantum mechanics in all my papers when doing that. Just the last example, really quickly, again from Susan Blackmore. She is quoting William James, psychologist who coined this famous phrase, stream of consciousness. You know, we have this idea, this notion that our consciousness is sort of continuous, don't we? That this is we live in a continuous flux of consciousness. And then she says, so if I ask you, are you conscious now? I pray you will answer yes. And then next time, are you conscious now? Yes. Are you conscious now? Yes, you know. But she would say it's exactly the same as opening the fridge to check whether the light is on constantly, you know. So that might totally be an illusion. It might totally be, and now I'm going back to the beginning of my lecture, might totally be a sort of prerequisition of the life world, which, if you remember, I emphasized the continuity. We need this feeling that we are constantly conscious, but perhaps we are just conscious whenever we check, we probe, in Dennett's word, our consciousness. And this is my last slide, which is, I think, really good connection to the next presenter. So I would just like to, first, if that was the last slide meant for cognitive science audience, it wouldn't be that. It would be something saying, if psychology tries to sort of mimic physics for 100 years already, why not mimic quantum physics, you know? That would be for psychology, but since I assume we are a more physically oriented crowd, then I will put the ball in your court again and say that it might be interesting to check what does it mean, what the new sort of knowledge about cognition and perception means to a physicist, or should mean to a physicist. What I mean especially is this is the sort of graph done by Hoffman and others, where they did sort of artificial life / genetic simulations, and they showed, they were comparing agents that were having the sort of copy-paste image of reality as their perceptual representation, and those that were just fit, their representations were just sort of useful for dealing with the environment, but had no actual contours of the real environment. And in all simulation, as Hoffman reports, it always fitness, as he calls it, or they call it, wins. So, if that is true, then, you know, in many apologies for physics and natural science say, yes, it's true because it works. Then it's exactly the opposite. It's not real because it works, if that is true. So I think it would need some re-examination if we really want to see the ontological background. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this very nice talk. Maybe just time for 1-2 questions.
Oh.
Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was quick because I'm completely happy with your talk.
Oh, thanks.
I want just to point out 2 things, because not taking too much time. Your example of am I conscious, am I conscious, am I conscious, and many other things, of course, reflect what has been happening and discussed already in antiquity. Am I stepping in the same river? Am I stepping in the same river? Am I stepping in the same river? Now. I'm citing Heraclitus of Ephesus, who is always put as the contrary to Parmenides, who says everything is. You would have your phenomenological and your your scientific world kind of opposition already there, very clearly, on a direct ontological level. The interesting thing is that for that reason, Plato and later Aristotle developed a worldview in which you have 2 layers, a scientific one and a phenomenological one. They belong together. They construct a link between the 2. It is all there. This is what my talk will be about. This is the definition of what the metaphysics is. So you very nicely describe why modern science remains.
I totally agree.
Yes. But this problem of the first person is present there, and you see it pop up again in relativity theory later on. So the only dissatisfaction I have is that the first person does not come enough to the fore, and I think that is this, because you still assume the separation between body and mind within the first person. And that is a bit problematic, because you assume that you look from a distance to your left knee when you're conscious of your knee. So there is something lacking there that troubles to conclude this fantastic analysis, but I congratulate you, and I thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree in a way, but I would say that we are oscillating, as researchers, oscillating between the position of disembodied consciousness and being the pain.
Where is the disembodied consciousness?
Yeah, no. I'm just saying that sometimes you need this position despite the fact that you know it's stupid. You know, it's false.
Yeah. You know, we will do some other experiments later.
Okay, cool. Yeah, but I agree with you, and I would just like to say, yes, metaphysics, that is exactly beyond physics, and this is the ontological questioning. I totally agree with that part.
So we can maybe approach one question, because we have to keep up the time, very rapid one, or?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that I think it's possible to train oneself not to feel the distance between one's extremities and one's soul.
I know that, yes.
No, I think that's like a point.
Not only that, to actually feel other people in the same field.
But the problem or the question does not disappear. It's simply.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I am writing right now about that, you know. I didn't want to emphasize that. I just wanted to emphasize this consciousness example as something where we do constantly metaphysics by assuming that we are in the flow, constant flow of consciousness, but our measurements actually don't prove that. We just know that at the moment where we ask ourselves, am I conscious now? We normally have the answer yes. You know, I just wanted to have this comparison. I didn't want to go there, but this is totally valid point.
We should discuss it.
Definitely.
Thanks again for this.
Thank you very much.